we'll be moving to Rome a little bit later
Okay.
here, but past 5 years we've been in Naples,
All right.
which is also good because 2 of those 5 were in lockdown. So
Yeah, correct.
moving to Rome a little bit later. Hold on one
Okay.
second. Yeah, here, but past 5 years we've been in Naples.
All right. All right. I've seen lots of pictures and movies on Italy, but I've never been there yet. I'm coming to London later this year.
Uh-huh.
Haven't done Italy.
Oh,
Should
you
do
should
it.
come. You should.
I should, I agree. Florence and Venice, I should definitely see.
Should also come down south
I
because
should, yeah, absolutely. Will do.
the only problem is.
Anyway in Europe, I have two very dear friends who studied with me in London and in Spain.
Oh, okay.
So I end up going to England more than I go to Europe. I don't know why, boss. I can easily come to Europe. There's no issues.
Yeah,
But
it's a
but
language.
truth be told, this year I did apply for a Schengen visa and I found out that they weren't giving visas out for the last 2 months.
Yeah, but they've started now
They have
since
started now apparently.
1st of April. Apparently, look. I mean, even last year
June.
they were giving visas exceptionally, but you had to make the declaration that you would stay in quarantine for 10 days, or you would remain in the UK or one of the C countries before
Mm,
you enter the Schengen area for 15
mm,
days.
mm,
So I had, for example, Mark Robinson, who works closely with one of our projects, was here,
mm.
but he happened to stay in London for 15 days because he has a daughter there, and then
Okay.
he came over to Naples. So that was doable even before, but you had to do a complete quarantine for 10 days,
Right.
etc. So it was
So
challenging.
this year I'll get around to doing a trip to Europe sometime later this year.
Good,
Maybe I will do Italy after all. Yeah.
good. You should.
I
It
should, yeah.
really needs to.
I've done most of the countries around Italy. I don't know why I haven't. Switzerland, Austria, France, Spain. I've done all of them, but I haven't done Italy. I should. I will this year.
So we'll see you here then. Anyways, we're
Yeah.
doing a lot of things later this year for the 75 years of Indian independence.
All right.
So we've just
Yeah,
started.
you should call me for something like that. Then there'll be no excuse.
Yeah, but we're not doing anything academic. No, we're doing more. We're doing something on fashion. So I'm not sure if it's involved in
Um,
fashion. We're doing a Bollywood summit between
oh,
Bollywood countries and Bollywood and here Italian producers, directors,
okay.
etc.
Sorry,
So
man. Not my type. Sorry.
not your spiel. So
No, not my type. Sorry.
also the university situation at the moment is a little still. I mean, it's all started in person again, but a lot of people are still doing stuff online, and
Hmm.
the
There'll be a
students are not
time.
100% students are not present. Some
Okay.
students
Oh,
still.
really? Even now?
Yeah, it's still hybrid still.
Mhm.
So we're assuming that till September it will continue like this.
Oh,
So
well, at least in India, everything has gone back to offline now. I don't
uh,
think there's a hybrid option, at least not in schools.
yeah, so yeah, so yeah, well, I'm not sure. Well, here it's still hybrid. Schools are not, but universities are.
Hmm. Hmm.
Also because
Okay.
of the fact that a lot of the university students don't live in the cities where they go to university.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So they actually have to take apartments. And
Right.
last time they did this, they opened everything. 3 months later, they had to shut everything down. So,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of
Gosh,
a.
that was, I remember there were these pictures of the Palace of the Doges and all of that floating around without anybody inside.
It's very
You
pretty,
never
actually.
see it like that, no?
A
Huh?
friend of mine just sent me his book. He was
Mm,
hired by the regional government of Veneto, where
mm,
Venice is located, to do
mm,
a region-wide project of photographing the whole region under lockdown. So it's
mm,
called Veneto 2020.
mm.
Italian, it's kind of because 2020 is Venti Venti, so it's Veneto Venti Venti. So it's
Okay.
kind of like a pun as well.
Okay.
So it's beautiful because it actually shows all the squares of Veneto with nobody present, which is
Yeah.
very, very well.
Spooky.
Eerie.
Eerie at least. Yeah, eerie for sure.
But I had a very nice time because I was going to Rome even during the lockdown, and
Mm,
you had the whole square to yourself. You could, there was,
You were actually able to go into Rome at that time?
yeah,
You had
because
the
I do
pass
a
and
lot
stuff?
of work with the government, so
Oh,
you needed paperwork because even to board a train here, there was.
Hello, hello, everybody. Can
Hi,
you hear me?
Diego. How are you?
Hi,
hi,
thank you.
Diego.
I'm
Just
good,
wanted
thank you.
to
Hi, Pradeep. Thank you
Hi.
for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
just want to introduce you. Professor Diego Majorana is the professor of modern India. So he's
Okay.
the only scholar of modern India in our university. Everybody else deals with ancient India or languages.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
everything that happened in the last 3 centuries is on my shoulder.
In the last 3 centuries.
Yes.
Hey, actually, that reminds me, Vas, I'm gonna pick up the phone and talk to you. I'm struggling with the PhD international examiner situation for my own PhD. So
Oh,
let me call
really?
you after this.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I will give you a call.
All our professors are online. So
Oh,
uh,
fantastic.
I'm hoping that Professor Visimini will join. She's the professor of ancient and medieval Indian history, and
Wonderful.
she's one of and actually her specialty is the Deccan. So
Okay. Super.
I'm not sure she'll make it today, but she was supposed to make it the other day when we were supposed to do it on Wednesday because we had done it in lieu of one of her lessons. So
Right.
she was
Okay.
able to make it. So
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Vas.
no
I don't know.
worries.
I mean, this something with the government. Yeah, my dad passed away in Jan.
Oh, such
And
sorry.
yeah, it was the last few weeks, last few months was difficult. And gosh, the government still make me running from pillar to post for these certificates, man. It was really frustrating, and Wednesday was one of those days.
No worries. Absolutely
Yeah,
not. Yeah,
that's why I had
give
to
me a call
postpone.
after this, and we can definitely speak. So
I'll
most
speak to
of
you
what
about
we
it.
do is we have a Sanskrit department where we do 3+2. So we have a BA program in Sanskrit and an MA program in Sanskrit as well as
Wow,
philosophy. We have Hindi as well, language and
wow.
literature. Then we have history, we have archaeology, and architecture. Again, our professor of archaeology and architecture, she said she'll try to join, but she's supposed
Okay,
to be in the train today at the same
okay.
time as we
Hey, but
speak.
it's, I mean, professors like Diego should actually, do they ever get a chance to bring your students to India at all?
Diego should answer that. He comes often, I think. Before COVID, he used to come quite often himself. But
Yeah.
students, I'm not very sure of. But
Okay.
Yeah, we have to look into this. There are exchange programs, but as I just joined the university, I still have to look into them
Okay.
for something in particular. I used to participate in an exchange program between Uppsala University and the University of Hyderabad, which
Okay.
worked quite well. So that is what I am planning to do with the University of Hyderabad itself.
Okay. No, I'd
We
love, Professor Diego, I'd love people like you to come over to southern Tamil Nadu. I've just opened a heritage hotel here. The whole idea is to get scholars to come and visit deep down south, which nobody has actually. Crispin Brandfoot has done some work in the south of India, but not many others have. And the time period we're talking about is the last 400 years, which is right up your sleeve.
Right. Yes, I am an Andhra person. So I used to
Okay.
work in Andhra and Telangana,
Oh,
but
okay. Okay.
gladly, I would gladly expand my
Right.
horizon further south.
Yeah. Well, the Nayaks who ruled the further south in the last 400 years spoke Telugu. So
Right.
there's a connection.
There is a connection there.
Yeah.
yeah, look, we're
But I
trying.
really struggled. I'm just in the throes of finishing a book on children's history of South India. And I really struggled with Andhra history
Right.
because there's so little in English.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Great.
one of my research assistant used to from Andhra used to write children's stories based on
Oh,
ancient children's stories in
wow.
Telugu. So he told
Oh,
me all about that. But yeah, as you said, it was everything was in Telugu.
yeah.
Anyway,
Frustrating that I couldn't
so
find much.
sorry, Mita, technical question. This is the fourth conference, right? Am I counting
The
right?
fifth conference, right?
The fifth. Oh
Fifth.
yes, yes,
Yes,
sure,
yeah, it's the fifth conference.
right.
We're also trying to push Pradeep to get a chair of Tamil financed by ICCR or one of the or the state of Tamil Nadu.
Wonderful.
So it's as you know, getting money from the Indian government is like
Oh, yes.
root canal surgery without
Oh, yes. Multiple root canal surgeries.
multiple root canal surgery. But we actually have a scholar who does a lot. She has a PhD in Tamil and she's very good. But funds are limited here, and
Yeah.
need to get the Indian government to step up a little bit.
Well,
So
for all the money that exchanged hands between Italy and Venice and Rome and everything in the 1,000 years back or 2,000 years back, this should be possible now, no? To set up a chair to study Italian and Indian connections.
well, I'm not very sure because
Yeah.
a lot of South India, even in Europe in general, not just in Italy, but in Europe in general, whatever studies are there, they're very North India centric.
Which is a shame.
South India is quite limited as far as study goes. But I mean, that's also Indian politics over the past
In politics is like that,
20
yeah, it's so
years.
North India specific.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is why I said I shouldn't complain about the problem. I should do something about it. I've written this book for children on South Indian history.
Right. So I think we should start if all of you guys are okay. We will
One
have
second, sorry. Do we have already another date for the next conference?
Yes, we do. We have 6th of June, and then we have on Dakhni, which Professor Badal Khan's doing, and then we have 8th of June, most probably. We have final one, but
Okay, no, just
to be confirmed. Next is on 6th of June.
right.
Confirmed.
Okay, already.
So I'll put us online, and then we'll probably have Stefania Cavaliere, who's also the professor of Hindi, join in a little later. Okay, it's 3:30. So Pradeep, if you're okay, we'll
I'm
go
good.
live.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm good.
going online now. Good evening, everybody. Seems like we have reached 50 people, so we start this evening's program. First, let me welcome all of you for today's talk on the temples of South India as institutions beyond religion, which is going to be held by author Pradeep Chakravarthy. Pradeep has an excellent CV, having worked first in consulting and then having moved to Indian history over time, and he'll speak more about that. First, let me request Professor Diego Majorano to say a few welcoming words and then turn over the mic to Pradeep. Diego?
Thank you, Vas, and welcome everybody. This is the fifth conference in the cycle of conferences organized by the Center for South and Southeast Asian Studies. So on behalf of the center, let me first of all thank Pradeep Chakravarthy for joining us today. And in this talk, we try yet again to try to correct a historical wrong that has neglected the south of India in much of historiography that is mostly focused on the north and northwest India. So the talk today is dedicated to temples in the far south of the subcontinent. And I really think you are not interested in anything more I could say about that, because we have the author here. So without any further ado, I would invite Pradeep to take the floor, and happy listening, everybody.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's a pleasure speaking today to this audience. I come from deep down south of India, from a state called Tamil Nadu. And in Tamil Nadu, the two southernmost districts are the Tirunelveli and the Thoothukudi districts. The Tirunelveli and the Thoothukudi districts are bordering the other state of Tamil Nadu, which all of you will be familiar with, which is Kerala. And for those of you who've studied ancient Italian and Indian history, you will know that these two states, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, did a lot of trade with Italy in the ancient days. In fact, many of the cities in these districts were on the trade route and would have definitely, I don't know whether they would have seen Italian traders, but they surely would have seen Arab traders who plied the goods that went on to Venice and other places in Italy. My talk today is really about temples in this part of Tamil Nadu. And I wanted you to understand temples, not just from a religious point of view, but from how they are great repositories of art and architecture. But before we get into those, I need you to also understand that whenever you get to visit a temple in southern Tamil Nadu, or in any part of India, at least the older temples, you must look very, very carefully. Here, for example, on my screen, I hope everybody can see the screen. Here, for example, on this side is a deer which has 4 heads. You'll be wondering what a deer with 4 heads is doing, but what the artist is actually saying is the deer is eating grass. It hears something, it looks up, looks backwards, it checks that nothing is there, and it goes back to eating grass. And the artist has used this traditional comic book approach of putting 4 heads to show how rapidly the deer is moving up and down. So you can't even see that it's moving up and down, but it looks as if it has 4 heads. And this panel, a sculpture panel, is just about 12 inches high. So it's really, it's probably a little bit more than your hand span. Yeah, just a little bit more than that. And that's the amount of detail that's carved in over here. On this side, you can see a sculpture again from the 17th century of what an elephant is doing standing on 2 legs. And this is actually in a circus. So you get a sense of how a circus happened at that point of time. And if you look very carefully over here, there's something like a tree. But this is really not a tree. These are clouds. So what the sculptor is trying to say is that the elephant is very big, that it's standing on this little mortar with 2 legs, but it's so big that it's almost touching the clouds. And over the clouds, the sight of the circus is so fantastic that all the gods and the divine celestial beings on the top from the heaven are all coming to see. So in a space of about your hand span, which is just about 12 inches or 10 inches, the artist has shown you an elephant and has also shown you how magnificent the spectacle is, because you have people from the heavens also coming to see it. So when you look at sculptures, just like you would in the Renaissance times, when you look at a painting or a sculpture, again in India, when you look at medieval paintings and ancient paintings in India, sculptures as well, you need to read between the lines, because the artist is constantly giving you a lot of symbols of size, of importance, and of story, and of movement. I wanted to start with a poem that was composed by a saint who lived about in about the 9th or the 8th centuries. Let me sing the verse to you as he probably may have sung it, and then we'll get on to the topic. Avar tamatamad arivari vahai vahai Avaravar Tamatamad Arivarivahay Avaravarirayavar Yanadi Adaivargal Avaravarirayavar Kuraivilariyavar Avaravar Irayavar Kuraivilariyavar Avaravar Vidhi Vazhi Adaya Ninranare Avaravar Vidhi Vazhi Adaya Ninranare. So this was a saint in the 8th or the 9th century who was offering a perspective of religion and God in a very, very contemporary egalitarian way. And he says all gods, all people can offer worship to the gods that they think are important. None of these deities are inferior to each other because each person will attain the God that they are fated to attain. And the accompanying image over here is a ruined temple on a rocky outcrop. This is also from deep down Tamil Nadu, from the two districts that I come from. So just to give you a sense of how visually beautiful these images can also be. But getting back into understanding temples, one fundamental difference between temples in the Hindu religion compared to, say, places of worship in the Abrahamic tradition is as follows. In the Hindu religion, temples are not just prayer halls. In fact, even if you look at the seating of a temple and the seating in a church, for example, you will see in a church that all the seats are aligned towards the central altar. And in a Hindu temple, you would see a passage to the altar, but there is no seating space available. So there is, in the Hindu temple, prayer is done in a very different way. And the main purpose, as you might be surprised to know, in a Hindu temple is not really prayer, but a deeper connection. So we need to understand this concept a little bit. Many of you might have heard the Sanskrit word Vastu. Vastu means anything that cannot be described. So we believe that our language, whatever language it is, Italian, English, Sanskrit, whatever language it is not possible for us to completely describe the universe and what is beyond the universe and what is beyond space. It is beyond gender, it is beyond vocabulary, it is beyond metaphors, it is beyond adjectives. And yet we have this tremendous desire to connect ourselves with the world and the space and the cosmos around us. And the space and the cosmos around us is also within ourselves. The water that we see outside is also within our body. The heat and the fire that we see outside is also within our body. The space that is outside we see within our body. The air that we see outside is also within our body. So the 5 elements are outside our body, they're also within our body. And we are constantly craving to connect completely to this world outside. But it's very difficult to connect with the world outside because we can't even describe it. We can't even understand it. We can't even fathom it. You can say universe, you can say space, but we don't know what is beyond space, what is beyond universe, but yet we want to connect with this. So whatever we can see, we connect with, which is the 5 senses. But what we cannot see was conceptualized as a person called the Vastu Purusha. This is the Vastu Purusha over here. Now, this Vastu Purusha was flying around in different places, and all the gods and the celestial beings felt very sad about human beings. And they said these human beings want to connect with the universe and the world that they cannot even describe, and that is the essence of this Vastu Purusha. So what the gods did was they picked the Vastu Purusha to come and sit like this on the floor, lie down on the floor. The minute the Vastu Purusha lied down on the floor, all the gods and the goddesses quickly jumped and sat over him. So you can see over here are all the gods and the goddesses over here, and the chakras or the energy points which connect the human body to the external world. These are the 7 chakras, and they sat on the Vastu Purusha. So the minute they sat on the Vastu Purusha, in a way, the Vastu Purusha became a person who the universe could connect with, and the people could also connect with, and he became the via media. So the position of these gods on the Vastu Purusha became the temple. So in the temple, when you see a temple, you may not see the individual gods. Many of these are gods, we don't even know their genders. We don't even know how they look like. Niruti, for example, our ancestors. Pitru, for example. Agni, we know. Vayu, we know. Many of these are gods. Yama, we don't even worship on a regular basis. But in the temple, all of these people are there. So when a devotee goes into a temple, he or she does not go there to worship a god alone. He or she goes there to be one with that cosmos, that universe, that earth that he or she can define and he or she cannot define. This is the very essence of the temple. Now, in the construction of a South Indian temple, you have the gopura, you have the dvajastambha or the flag mast, you have the bali pitas, you have the mantapas, and you have the vimana inside which is the garbhagraha. Here, this is a lingam here, which is an aspect of Shiva. You can also have a deity here of Vishnu or Muruga or anybody, but all of these correspond to the different chakras or the human body as well. And ultimately, the ultimate chakra is here. It's a Manasa chakra, where when you do a darshan of the main deity, the deity looks straight back at you. And what the deity is saying is, if you look at me with anger, you will get back anger. If you look at me with possibility, you will get back possibility. If you look at me with fear, you will get back fear. Because ultimate truth is the deity is not in the image, the deity is within ourselves. The deity becomes the stone or the wood or the painting deity that is inside the sanctum of the temple is just an image that helps us connect with ourselves, with the people and the world around us, and with that part of the world and the universe and the cosmos that we cannot even define. This is the fundamental belief of a Hindu temple. Now, today you may or may not see different parts of it, but if you sit back, observe carefully the rituals that happen, the texts that govern the construction of a temple, again and again you will see the temple is not a prayer hall. It is a place for us to connect with ourselves, with the world around us, and the part of the world and the universe that we cannot even describe. So all our temples started off as small temples like this. This is a very rare image of a brick temple. For those of you who come to Chennai at some point of time, you might have gone to Kanchipuram. This is a brick temple that is close to Kanchipuram. Very rare to find these kind of brick temples today because they were all renovated in the medieval times. These small brick temples, single structure brick temples, eventually became massive temples because kings like him got very, very involved in this. And we will come to the story. So even today, the word in Tamil for temple is not Devalaya, it is Kovil. Kovil is literally translated into Kon Illam. Kon means king, Illam means queen. So the Illam means house. So in a way, it is like the divine right of kings that you see in Europe as well, where religion and politics have played a very, very close connection together. This happened in India as well, in Tamil Nadu as well, but the connection was a little different than what it was in Europe. Let us understand this difference. So even today, if you see this, when pilgrims come into the temple, the first place they will prostrate is in front of this flag mast over here. And this flag mast is the symbol of the king in the palace. So while the palace equals the temple and the god equals the king, from about the 9th century onwards, actually from the 7th century onwards, this became a very, very tight connection. 7th century ACE, it became a very, very tight connection. And this was not surprising because when religion gave the king legitimacy to rule, the king in turn gave the religion a lot of money. And the second reason was this is where it was slightly different from what happened in Europe. Definitely in Tamil Nadu, this was the case. Andhra, Karnataka to some extent. North India, we're not so sure, but it should have been something similar. Kings had to be traveling all the time. They were always worried about civil war happening in different places. So they needed somebody in the local community they could trust, who could do the job the king had to do. And the temples did that. So anything that you expect from the government to do for the local community, hospitals, education, collection of taxes, providing employment opportunities, all of these facilities in medieval times in Tamil Nadu were given by the temple to the local community. So the temple really became the government's representative in the local community. So, for example, here is a temple which has a granary. Yeah, this is a temple with a slightly more spooky taste. There was a very heterodox sect of Shaivas called the Lakulisha Pashupatas, and for a short time in the Chola period, they were the gurus for the Chola kings. And when the Chola king or queen died, that dead body was given to the Lakulisha Pashupatas. They used to do a lot of rituals around it, and they used to bury the body and then build a temple over it. There are only 4 temples like this in Tamil Nadu. This is definitely one of them. Little offbeat. I just wanted to give you a sense of how there could be some different tomb temples you don't find. It is not only in Egypt that you find tombs, pyramids. It is not only in churches that you find bodies buried, but in India as well. In Tamil Nadu, at least, you have not many, just about 5 or 6 of them. You have temples that were built over the remains of a king or a queen in medieval times. But we're going to go really further down south. This is Tirunelveli. So many of you will know where Chennai is, a little further up. This is Kerala. For those of you who've been to Kerala, further up there is Bangalore. Over here is Tirunelveli, and further down south, this is really the region that we're going to go to. And all of this was a part of the trade route between, when trade was active between Italy and India. So I kind of chose this area because many of your ancestors might have been here for sure. On the banks of the Tamraparni River is this mound called Adhanalu, and we have found some Roman remains here as well. This was an important port city 3,000 years back, and in these places we found this, which is a tiny bronze mother goddess, which is just about the size of your little finger, your pinky. Just about that size. This image is now in the Chennai Government Museum, and like you would see in ancient Crete and places like that, Mother Goddess worshipping tradition was very important to them. For us, and Adhanalu had this Mother Goddess figure. This is the earliest bronze in South India excavated. You all know about the Chola bronzes, but this in the Tirunelveli district and Adhanalu is the earliest bronze. They found a lot of gold jewelry over here as well. That is unfortunately now in the Berlin Museum. There's a lot of weapons that we found here, iron weapons, pottery shards that we found here, conch bangles which were used for export to Europe, to Italy at that point of time. All of these were found there. These are all the Chennai Museum. So the place that we are talking about, southern Tamil Nadu, Tirunelveli, Thoothukudi district, are really, really ancient. This is another place not too far off from there. This is called Malayadi Kuruchi. This is a perfectly pyramidical kind of a hill, and on the sides of the hill are many of these burial vases. You know, I've heard in Rome, even today, if you dig somewhere, you will find ancient remains. India is not very different. Tamil Nadu is not very different. Even today, if you go to Malayadi Kurchi, on the sides of the mountain, exposed like this, are funeral remains, maybe from about 1,000 to 2,000 to 2,500 years old. And on the mountain is this ancient cave temple over here. It's got a Shiva image over here, but there was actually a Jain image over here. And there are other cave temples here, which are also equally scenic. The earliest temples that we have are the cave temples. So today they may look a little primitive, but these were phenomenal works of art and architecture because they were done in about the 7th and the 8th centuries, when they used just a hammer and a chisel and a plumb line. The geometry, the precision of digging through a cave. You know, in some of these caves that are even sideways, there are sculptures within the cave which are made out of the same rock. All of this was done with absolute precision. If you go to any cave temple, Mahabalipuram, of course, many of you might have heard of, but these are cave temples that are little before Mahabalipuram at the same time, but they're all complete temples. Mahabalipuram is incomplete, most of it. The marvel here is that these artisans were able to execute such perfect works. Every pillar is aligned, every doorway is aligned. If there is a sculpture in front of a doorway, that doorway and the sculpture is perfectly aligned. The sculpture, the doorway, the pillar, the steps to the doorway, everything is carved out to the same rock of the mountain, and yet there is no mistake. So imagine, even if there was 1 degree of mistake, 1 angle did not match, the whole project had to be scrapped, but everything is perfect here. That is the genius of the stone carvers in the 7th and the 8th century. Sometimes our temples also have other information. So here you will see many temples in South India having this red and white marks. Red represents mensorial blood and white represents semen. So these are the 2 most important things for life. And in a way, all these old practices, just like when Christianity became a developed religion, it took on many of the pagan practices and it reformed them in different ways. We also did the same thing. Many of these old practices of life rituals, we brought it into mainstream Hinduism, and we've created our own ways of looking at it. This temple looks very, very simple from the outside. Inside are these 2 pillars. They also look very simple, but on the pillars are this very important 64-line inscription. And the 64-line inscription tells us of how in the 8th century, the village committee met together and it decided to redo its entire way of electing representatives to govern it. So many people in India, in fact, most people in India think that democracy actually came with the British, which is not true at all. We had our own sophisticated systems of democracy, just as sophisticated as there was in Greece at that point in time, or maybe even in Rome at a later point in time. We had our systems of democracy. And in fact, I've written an article about this, and you can Google this up later, Pradeep Chakravarthy plus Dailyo, where I've actually argued that the system of democracy that we had based on 2-3 ancient temple inscriptions like this in the 8th century was far more rigorous, far more complex, and far more efficient than the kind of democracy that we have in India today. There are some sculptures that tell us of stories of trade. So you can see here, there are these Chinese or Arab merchants over here. They've got a ship, which you can just see the prow of the ship over here, and they're bringing horses and camels all the way from Arabia, and they're taking back, and they're meeting the king over here as well. So this again is in a temple called Tirukurungudi, which is not very far off from the Heritage Hotel that I've just set up in Alvarado Temple village. And there's a very interesting story where an Arab horse trader, he actually complains about what idiots these Indian people are, because these people keep buying expensive horses from us. But after they buy the horse, they feed it butter and milk and curds and yogurt and things like that, which is useless because the horse doesn't eat all that. So he has a good laugh and he says, well, it's just as well that they do that, because the more and more they kill horses, the more and more new horses that they buy. In these temples, we have deities who are long forgotten. This is an early 8th century image of Vishnu, who was an important god in the Hindu pantheon. But I'm showing it here because it's a very, very primitive image where the Upavita, or the upper garment of Vishnu, it actually goes over his hand rather than under. So the sculptor is just learning how to work with stone in the 7th, 8th century, and he's been able to do something like this. This is a woman who looks a little scary, and she's supposed to look a little scary. Many of you might have heard of the goddess Lakshmi. She is the goddess of prosperity for us. Lakshmi had an older sister called Moodevi. And Moodevi, her worship was very, very powerful till about the 8th century, and then it completely died out. Moodevi was the goddess of ill luck, ill fortune, dirt, and messes. So if you did not want to have bad luck, you did not want to have disease, you did not want to have a dirty house, you did not want bad things happening to you, to pray to Moodevi. Can you imagine? She was such a powerful, such an important god. Goddess today, we've completely forgotten her worship. So gods and goddesses also have their own popularity charts, just like Hollywood film stars and actresses. Some temples in my region are also very unique. This one here in Sharanma Devi has actually 3 floors. You have a ground floor, first floor, and a second floor. And this one here is a massive temple which has a door which can be locked at 3 levels. It's a 35 feet high door. That temple where I showed you pictures of the deer of the Arab traders, they're all from this temple. One of the finest temples. This is from about the 17th century. By which time actually art had became very, very templatized. but you will see, just like you had the Renaissance in Italy, where people started thinking differently and creatively, in this temple, you will see that kind of creativity in the 17th century. Many other temples in the 17th century in India, very, very templatized, very rigid structures, but this temple thought of it completely differently. Yeah? Some of them are just visually stunning. This is Brahmadesam. This is a Shiva temple, not very far off from my village. And you can see this lovely pool of water here. And you'll find all temples had a pond of water in front of them, because the temple and the pond were very important in the agrarian economy system. This pond would ensure that water was freely available for the local community. And one of the gifts that many kings used to give in temples was garlands of lotuses. And the idea of giving garland of lotus, and they would give maybe, every day there should be 28 lotuses, or there should be 108 lotuses. So imagine how many lotus flowers you are needed for 108 lotuses every day. So how big that lake should be. The reason was that because these lotuses had to come to the temple every day to worship, that pond has to be well maintained. And if the pond is well maintained, that was a water source for the entire village. And the water source was important because it was an agrarian economy, and we grew rice. And rice, as many of you will know, is a very, very highly water intensive crop. So everything that they thought of giving as a gift to the temple was not just to make the king feel great or the donor feel great, it was actually to make the community work well with each other. Some of these temples have phenomenal wood carving. So here is a door which is at least about 300 to 400 years old. Each of these panels are just 1 foot by 1 foot, just 12 inches by 12 inches. Look at the enormous amount of detail. This is our god Rama with his faithful retainer Hanuman. Here is another door which is very beautifully carved. Inside also you can see, though by about 300 years back we had stopped learning how to build ships, we still knew how to use that kind of a shape. So this is the prow of this is the base of a ship. That's the same principle that they've used over here. You'll notice these iron nails, which are long protrusions, about 3 inches tall, very, very beautifully carved. These iron nails were meant to prevent elephants from battering those doors open. So this door doesn't have those because this is inside the temple. This one does because it's outside temple wall. Because in times of war, the temples used to be the place where the people would go for protection, and the enemies would have elephants. And these elephants would bang these doors open. But when they saw these kind of iron knobs, they wouldn't do that. So that's why they're there. But even though they had utilitarian purpose, these are so beautifully carved. And then inside the temple, you would find these Vahanas. So I think you have these. I've seen photographs in some Catholic churches in Spain and Italy, where on certain feast days, the Virgin Mary goes out in procession. In the Hindu tradition also, we have something like that. These are the days when people who are not allowed to come to the temple could also see God and goddesses. So these are called Vahanas. They would be, say, about 8 or 16 men who are about 5.5 feet high. They would hold these massive metal images of snakes, of animals. And this one is particularly precious because this is completely cast out of one metal. So it's like a bronze image. It's very, very difficult to do something. This alone must be about 5 feet high. And on top of this over here, this is called a jetty. This is a disc that is about 3 feet long and another 3 feet wide. This disc is made out of copper, and this goes on the top and sits over here. So imagine 5 feet high men carrying something which is about another 10 feet high, and then there'll be an umbrella on the top. Look at how grand this procession will be. And zoom into this, you will see there are birds, there are squirrels, there are monkeys, all kinds of animals. This is literally like the tree of life. Very, very rare to see this. There are only 2 like this in India. This is the more beautiful one. This is also from a village called Manarkoil, which is not very far off from Tirunelveli, which is where my hotel is. Then there are paintings as well. Now, in the Italian tradition, you have the dry fresco technique, where a plaster would be applied, and then the paintings will be painted on the top. This painting is like that. The older Indian tradition is actually the wet fresco technique, which is much more complicated, where the painting had to be completed when the plaster was still wet. Now, this meant that if the artist made a careless mistake, the entire plaster will have to be removed and the whole process will have to start again, number one. And number two, the artist will have to really know their colors well, because the wet plaster will react with the chemical nature of the paint in different ways. So they really need to understand the paint composition as well. Unfortunately, in my area of Tamil Nadu, we don't have any more of the wet fresco paintings because they've all been gone. India is a very humid country, so it's difficult to keep these things. But we have these dry fresco methods, and this is of a European soldier. So you can see him wearing stitched cloth. This is a big battle that's happening. This is all from a village called Tirupure Marudur. The entire Gopram, or the entrance tower of 4 stories, is filled with paintings like this. And you'll see all of them have captions on the bottom as well. There are some beautiful works in stone as well. You can see how brilliantly this man's leg has been carved. I don't know whether your calf muscles are as strong as his. And if you look very carefully, you can see highly stylized leather shoes. So today, I know both in Italy and in India, we love our leather. We love our leatherware. And look at this, way back in the 17th century, the 16th century, India still had a lot of leather slippers as well. And I want to bring to your attention that these kind of sculptures here are out of granite. And granite is a stone that is much harder and much denser to carve than marble. So these people must have been really, really good at carving stones. And all of this, of course, by the way, would have been one stone. So each of these pillars would be one stone. Imagine how magical it would have been in the old days when all these ladies, they all have a lamp in their hand. This would have been filled with oil. There'd have been a wick, and this would have been lit in the night. Imagine how beautiful it would have looked in the old days. So that's some beautiful sculptures in stone as well. And you have some fun stuff as well. So here is a snake that is a monkey that's playing with a snake. Here's a cat that's caught hold of a pigeon. And on the floors of temples, you will see these kind of etchings. These are not graffiti. These are actually games. This is a game called Adupuliyatam, which is played even today. It's a contest between goats and tigers. And I won't tell you how to play the game, because I'm hoping you will learn how to play it when you come to India next. And then, of course, there are temples which have this very stupendously beautiful carved work. This is all from the Alvarado Temple, from the village that I belong to. And you will see in the 14th, 15th century, this is a masterpiece of architecture where these granite stones have been carved and then they have been installed. And sometimes these are done with no binding material, with complete precision. So there'll be a male socket, male joint and a female joint, and they'll both merge together, and that's how the stone will stand together in its own way. There are also important performing arts. For those of you who are looking at studying these kind of arts, I strongly invite you to come. In Tamil Nadu, in the southern region from where I'm focusing my talk, there is something called the Kaisika Natakam that happens in a temple once a year. It's an all-night performance where a lower caste devotee, just because he keeps his word, helps an upper caste person reach God. A very, very different kind of a story, and it really makes you question how deeply people were opposing caste and fighting against caste in the 17th centuries as well. And on this side is a photograph of an Arayar. An Arayar is a performer who, through music, dance, and drama, teaches us the philosophy of very, very deep poems. So these are all sacred theatrical arts, very, very rare to find in India today. In Tamil Nadu, especially in South India, southern Tamil Nadu, we still have a few of these performing arts alive. And it's very sad. Of course, the Arayar tradition, the Kaisika Natakam, many people are coming to see. Arayar Seva, not so many people go. It usually happens during December, January. So it's a great time to travel. If you're in India in December, Jan, go. There are only 3 temples where the Arayar Seva is still performed. Please go and have a look. And then apart from this, there are other places where there are older stories as well. This is from a time when there was today we're all reeling from the lockdown effects. But would you believe that in my part of Tamil Nadu, there was a village, actually a fort of about 300, about 30 kilometers, where the women inside the village were never allowed to come out. Women from outside were allowed to go in, men from outside were not allowed to go in, and the women stayed inside. So they were women who lived and died in the fort without ever having come out, without ever having seen a man who lived outside the fort. Now, you would think that this is a very terrible thing, but I've spoken to some of the older women in the 80s, they're in their 80s and 90s, but they actually didn't bother about it at all. In fact, one of them actually said, well, we hear a lot about America and Europe, but many people have never been there. So it looks like that. And these were women, they owned land outside, their men worked for their land. And interestingly, they had a quasi-matrilineal system. There's a wonderful book called Boundary Within Walls, which was written a long time back. Strongly recommend you to read that. And for that community, this fort door was actually their temple, which is why the fort is all gone. They don't live like that anymore. Even in the 70s, the system collapsed completely, but the fort wall and the fort door is still there. This is their temple. And there are other very, very beautiful places like this where you can see the remnants of wonderful plaster work. All of these are falling apart. So I hope from this you got a sense of how temples look like in ancient Tamil Nadu, especially in the southern part of Tamil Nadu. I hope it's given you a sense of understanding how they are. Now, apart from this, some of them are, of course, in beautiful, stunning settings like this. On the banks of the Tambraparni River in southern Tamil Nadu is a place of about 300 acres where the earth, the sand in the earth is completely red in color. I've not photoshopped this image. This is the actual color. There are about 300 acres where you will see sand dunes, sand which is very fine, which is completely crimson red in color. And not very far off from there is this massive temple for Muruga, who is one of our important deities on the seashore. This is Tiruchendur. Tiruchendur finds a place in ancient Tamil texts, and this was definitely a place where many of our traders happened as well. So I've started with how temples can be seen not just as religious institutions. We've kind of ended with some of the most stunning temples, one of the most stunning temples in the part of southern Tamil Nadu. I hope this has given you a sense of how temples can be looked at. And I think we have another 10-15 minutes. Happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pradeep, for a very interesting way of looking at things. I mean, I've been to several temples in my lifetime, too many probably, but I think it's a very, very interesting way of looking at things. I understand you come from more of a consulting background, and how did you? I mean, I've done something very similar as well. Started studying Sanskrit and Indian history at a much later point in life. But how did you? How did your spirit of discovery start?
I think for me, about 20 years back, I visited a town called Thirumayam, which is not very far off from Madurai, which is in southern Tamil Nadu again. And there were two temples there, both cave temples, and there was a rock and there was a fort on the top. Very, very scenic place. Hardly anybody there, and you had the whole place to yourselves. And there was a man selling mangoes over there, which were very, very tasty. So all in all, it was a lovely experience. And when I came back, I kept thinking about that place for a long time. And then somebody said, why don't you go and go to the Archaeological Survey of India and find out more information? So I went there, and they gave me a book which had all the inscriptions. I didn't even know what an inscription was at that point of time. And I later learned that in the south of India, you had many, many temples where all the important decisions that were taken by the government were recorded on the walls of the temple in stone inscriptions. These are called epigraphs, and today, of course, they're all translated into English. And there's a fund of information here that scholars can make use of. So you can get a very exact sense of what daily life was like in medieval in Tamil Nadu through reading these inscriptions. Professor Subbarayalu, for example, and many others have done a lot of work on this. My PhD thesis is on this region. So, for example, income tax, land tax, civil disputes, criminal disputes, names of people, performing arts in the temple, how was land, what were the crops that land gave, what were the merchants' life like, all of this was there. So in this temple, there was a record of a bitter caste dispute between people who worshipped Shiva and people who worshipped Vishnu. They were killing each other, they were breaking temples, they were throwing the images into the ponds, and there was blood on the streets. This was so bad that the local king couldn't sort it out. He got a general from a nearby state to come and sort it out. And what he did was exactly what the Allies did in Berlin about 70 years back, where they partitioned the village into two. Just like they built the Berlin Wall in Thirumayam, between the Shiva temple and the Vishnu temple, there was a wall that was erected. And what didn't happen in Berlin, but happened in India and Pakistan, was people from the Shiva side, if they worshipped Vishnu, they had to move to the other side and vice versa. Land, irrigation facilities, everything was exchanged. And this was a landmark decision, and the entire village was partitioned into two. The communities had to move to each other's side. But today, after about 400-500 years, if you go there, nothing of this is there. And this really struck me, because even today we are still fighting over religion and race and caste and everything. And I wrote an article about this, and people loved it, and it got published. So from then on, I started looking at temples as social institutions, because I realized that human behavior, human nature does not change. Whether I live in India, whether you live in Italy, whether somebody lives in the Americas, whether they live in Austria, we still want respect. We still want affection. We still want safety. And when we are afraid, when we are feeling alone, we tend to react in fairly similar ways. So now I have started looking at history, not just from a sense of what happened when, but also why it happened and what we can learn from the why for how we can think differently for ourselves.
Let me ask you a question that I've just got from somebody. First of all, per tutti, for everybody, question and answers are open, so you can either put your hand up and I'll let you speak, or you can type your question. Professor Shilpa Khatri Babbar says, very interesting presentation. How do you justify Hampi, which has both Shiva and Vishnu temples? Regards, Dr. Shilpa.
Thank you. Not all kings who ruled in those times were quite happy to look at both sides of Shiva and Vishnu. And in fact, when I explained the Vastu Purusha Mandala, which is the template for all temples, both Shiva and Vishnu are present. Yes, there was a lot of fighting between the two people, but that's the way it always happens, right? All religions, they start as one, and then there are different streams that come about. It happens in every religion. But when it came to an ideal village that had to be set up, it had to have a temple for Shiva and Vishnu. So, Dr. Shilpa, there have been many instances of people who worship Shiva and Vishnu fighting with each other, but there are many instances of kings and wise people bringing worshippers of Shiva and Vishnu together. So there's always been people who fight about something. There's always people who bring together using religion. So, I mean, at the end of the day, both of this happens. The Vijayanagar kings were Vaishnavite, so they believed in Vishnu, but that didn't prevent them from supporting Shiva. In fact, let me make it even more complex. There are cases in Karnataka and the Hoysala kings, and in fact in Tamil Nadu, where the king was Shaivite or a Hindu, and the queen was a Jain who believed in a totally different religion. She had that too.
It's very interesting.
Our ancient society was far more tolerant than many of us are today, unfortunately or fortunately.
Let me add to that, because my paternal ancestral family comes from a very small village called Mulki, where we moved to after Goa, where we were exiled from. And Mulki actually is one of the oldest Jaina kingdoms. It's been historically ruled by Jaina kings, I think from 600, 700 AD onwards. And our family first settled there around 1240, 1250 AD. And so if you actually see epigraphs, there are Jaina epigraphs, there are Shaivite epigraphs. Very close by, there was a very important Kalamukha Matha as well. So you had extreme Shaiva, this the temple itself of the family, even though our family deity is Shiva, our Gram deity is Ugra Narasimha, so the temple is a Vaishnava temple. Plus, one of the things that I'm working on is this kind of political mix of, eventually the Vijayanagara king, especially the first Sangama dynasty, eventually started doing a lot of work on Ramanatha, which was Harihara, and that's why you have also the rennial names of some of the initial Vijayanagara kings were from Bukka, he became Harihara, etc. So a lot of this political positioning was, there were different political forces, the extreme Shaiva, non-Vedic ones, the Shaiva Vedic ones. So, I mean, it must have been a very colorful period in history. Let me ask you something on Tanjavur, because I think one of your books was on Tanjavur. I've unfortunately not been able to get your books here yet, and I can't find PDF versions online. So,
Yeah, unfortunately.
so Tanjavur is a very unique place in India, and for those that do not know, it's in the south of India, but for a very long time, it's had also very strong Maratha history of Maratha kings from Maharashtra. So it's culturally and politically very unique. So if you could speak for 5 minutes about Tanjavur, especially the arts and the effect of this kind
I'll
of.
show you a picture here. I don't know whether you can see it well. It's on the top. It's
Oh, no.
Tanjore painting. And I want you to see this very carefully. And I don't know whether you can see it. The lighting's not very good. It's a Krishna which is kind of crawling,
Right.
and he's on a bench, and he's got a pot of butter,
Right.
and he's white in color, right? So for those of you, and I'm very happy that I'm doing this to a group of scholars in Italy, because this image of Krishna, which is so popular in the Tanjore painting style, and the Marathas ruled in Tanjore in the 17th century and the 18th century, sorry, the 18th and the 19th centuries. And they created the school of Tanjore paintings, and you should Google that up later, because basically it's a wooden board, cloth is fixed, and then gesso, which is a kind of paste, is applied, and then that is gilded on the top. So it's like a kind of like a Russian icon, but you can't say the same. But it's got a 3D effect, and they paste a lot of jewelry, not maybe precious stones, but semi-precious stones and glass. So it looks, in a way, many people have studied it compared to icons in of the Greek Orthodox churches. This image of Krishna was actually inspired by Italian Baroque cherubs. Our Krishna was usually darker in color, darker gray in color. But in the Tanjore period times, there were many sculptors who were from England and from Italy who were working on churches in India. And when they brought these marble cherubs here, Tanjore painters loved the concept, and that's how they created this. So if you go back to see many of the Renaissance and the Baroque churches, you will see these kind of cherubs, this kind of shape, and that's when Krishna also became white, because the cherub is in marble is usually white in color. So our very dark colored Krishna became a white god as well. So I think there are many things that I can talk about the Marathas, but what I should say is the Marathas came from Maharashtra, which is quite further up north, and they came all the way to south to Tanjore. But they were very, very tolerant about the Tamil culture, and they brought a lot of their culture into the Tamil culture, and they grew it a lot more. So all the time I've seen in India, when different rulers came from different parts of India to rule different parts of India, they really enriched the cultural tapestry of the land, and that's important. As we talk about Marathas, it's important for us to talk about Marathas. But maybe we should, at some other point of time, do a talk on the Brihadishwara temple.
Absolutely, because I think it's a unique. I look at Tanjore as a unique island of Indian culture, because
Absolutely.
it's one of those places that has retained its original Tamil culture, brought in Maratha culture, and then created a fusion, which is quite similar to what the Marathas have done in Gwalior as well as in Ujjain in the north.
True.
But I think Tanjore is far more unique than these two North Indian places. So I think that's something that we should probably do at some point in the future. Any other questions? So I don't manipulate. Yeah, here's one question. Not sure if you can read the chat.
Okay, yes, I saw the chat.
The yearly
So
performance.
the yearly performance, right? Thank you. So the performance is called the Kaisika Natakam. Let me just type that out for everybody. Okay. And the Kaisika Natakam is the name, and it happens in Tirukurung. That's the name of the village. Yeah. So this is the story. There is a lower caste devotee called Nampaduan. And it was a practice, and Nampaduan, being a lower caste devotee, was not allowed to come into the temple. Every night, after his work was over, and when the village was sleeping, he would quietly steal up to the front of the temple, and he would sing verses on the deity inside. At one day, Nampaduan sang his songs, and he was walking back, and he met this Brahma Rakshasa. Brahma Rakshasa is a Brahmin who is of much higher caste, who gets cursed to be, well, the demon is not the right translation, but we'll go with that, who is cursed to be a demon because he violates the rules of being a Brahmin. And in Indian law, the higher the caste, the stricter the punishment, right? So it's actually, caste system is not always as easy as we have made, as we think them to believe. There's a lot more complexities to it. So the Brahma Rakshasa stops Nampaduan and he says, I'm going to eat you up. And Brahma Rakshasa says, sure, you can, but not today. Tomorrow is Kaisika Ekadasi, which is in the Indian constellation of stars, a very, very important day. And just let me sing that one day. The Brahma Rakshasa says, listen, do you think I'm a fool? Here I am saying that I want to eat you, and you are saying, no, you'll come back tomorrow. And Nampaduan, that's the name of the hero of the story, he says, no, I surely will. And at that point of time, Nampaduan lists a whole series of sins that people can commit. And he says, if I don't come back tomorrow and I don't keep my word, whatever evil will befall on me will be the evil that befalls a person who does this crime. And this list of crimes are important because, in a way, they tell you, in the perspective of that author who wrote this in about the 15th or the 16th century, what was seen as good and bad in the society. And two or three things that are very interesting that he talks about is, he says, a husband who deserts his wife, a person who ill-treats their parents. There are many of these which are actually quite favorable to women's rights. So it's wonderful. Actually, somebody should do a much deeper study of this. So anyway, finally the Brahma Rakshasa agrees. And the next day, Nampaduan sings his song. And when he comes back, he is wailed by the god himself, who is dressed up like an old man. And the old man says, don't go this way. The Rakshasa is there. Go another way and save your life. And Nampaduan says, no, I will not do that. I will keep my word. And he goes, and when he sees the Brahma Rakshasa says, my God, here is a devotee who has kept his word. And now if I eat this fellow up, I have sinned even more. And I will get more evil things that will happen to me. So now the Brahma Rakshasa is saying, I don't want to eat you. And the devotee is saying, no, I want you to eat me because I want to keep my word. So they have a very interesting debate between themselves. So I'm saying, I don't want to eat. He says he want to eat. And then finally the Brahma Rakshasa says, no, I don't want to eat you, but I want that the merit that you have accumulated out of singing on that one day, I want that merit. Because, and when Nampaduan gives that merit to the Brahma Rakshasa changes, he is absolved of all his sins, he becomes the old Brahmin that he was, and he goes off to heaven and joins Vishnu. And even today, every Vishnu temple in South India should, don't ask me whether they do that, but they should read this whole verse. It's a long book. It's about, but not too many verses, maybe about 400, 500 verses. So you can finish reading the whole thing in about 2 to 3 hours. In Tirukurungudi alone, because this incident happened there, this is enacted as an all-night drama. It starts at about 9 in the night and it finishes at about 3 in the morning. And you can go and see it even today. The name of the Nampaduan is the name of the person. If you go to Tirukurungudi and if you search for Kaisika if you search for this, you'll be able to find more information about it. Try and come and see it at some point in time. It usually happens around October, November times.
Perfect. If there are any other questions, Professor Shilpa Khatri Babar asks you if there's a possibility of getting a link to the presentation because she joined in late.
Yeah, I think I should be able to do that.
Yeah,
The
so if
PDF.
that's
And
possible.
I'll put in my email ID anyway. So if people want to reach out and do other things, I can always be in touch. And I'm available on Facebook and Instagram and everything. And I would love, Bas, if people have been excited enough. I'm sure many people here have a strong connection to Indology in India. So if they are in Chennai, if they are in Tamil Nadu, love to take them around, do something for them. Happy to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pradeep. If there are any other questions, because I think we're almost out of time and it's also dinner time in India. So, if there are no more questions, I'd ask Professor Cavaliere to say a few words.
Good evening. I'm sorry, no. Hello. Good evening, and thank you very much, Pradeep, for this very fascinating talk. It was an inspiring overview on the artistic, architectural, cultural life of temples in Tamil Nadu. I think all our students and attendees have been very inspired by your talks, and we will be willing to read all your works and use your work as an example to mix different approaches to have a more complete overview on the history of South India and culture. So, and also it was extremely inspiring also to me to go back as soon as possible. It was really beautiful. So thank you very much on behalf of the Center of Studies of the University. It was a pleasure to have you, and we hope we will keep in touch and to host you also to Italy very soon.
I would very much look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you again, Pradeep, and thank you for making the time. We'll be in touch as usual. Please call me whenever. And thanks again, everybody. Have a good weekend. And see you soon for the next appointment, which is supposed to be on the 6th of June on Dakhni and on the resurgence of Dakhni literature in Hyderabad and in Telangana. So thank you so much, Pradeep, and speak soon. Namaskar. Thank you.